At my sister's wedding, I watched her smirk as she introduced me to her boss as the unemployed wife who can't keep up. Before I could even answer, her boss glanced at me, smiled, and turned to her with words that stunned the room. If anyone's losing their job today, it's you. Gabriella, the unemployed wife who can't keep up. My sister Rosalie's voice rang across the Riverside Pavilion's grand ballroom, each word precise and cutting as she presented me to Vincent Blackwood, CEO of Nexus Capital Partners. 200 wedding guests turned to stare as she continued with a champagne-bright smile. She had such promise once, but now? Well, some people just aren't cut out for real success. The crystal chandeliers seemed to spotlight my humiliation while Vincent Blackwood studied my face with an intensity that made my spine straighten. What Rosalie didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I owned 40% of the company she worked for, held through anonymous shell companies that had saved Nexus from bankruptcy 4 years ago. Vincent's gray eyes held mine for 3 long seconds before he spoke. Gabriella Winters? The way he said my maiden name made Rosalie's smile flicker. The Gabriella Winters from Winters Holdings? The champagne glass in Rosalie's hand trembled slightly. You know my sister? If anyone's losing their job today, it's you, Vincent said quietly, his words dropping into the sudden silence like stones into still water. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how we arrived at this moment, my sister destroying her own career at her wedding reception, I need to go back to this morning, to the life I'd carefully built in shadows for the past 3 years. I woke at 5 a.m. in our Chicago townhouse as I had every morning since leaving Deloitte. Nathan slept beside me, unaware that his supposedly unemployed wife was about to review quarterly reports for 14 different startups. The blue glow of my laptop screen illuminated stacks of documents marked Confidential Winters Holdings, spread across my side of the bed. $23 million in assets, carefully managed through shell companies and private equity structures that kept my name off every public record. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, I'd been one of Chicago's most visible strategic consultants, my name in trade publications and my face at every industry conference. Now I was invisible by choice, and that invisibility had become my greatest strategic advantage. A notification popped up on my screen, an encrypted message from Vincent Blackwood. Urgent. Evidence secured regarding NO data breach. Full disclosure at today's reception. Please confirm attendance. NO, Nexus Operations, was the internal code for sensitive company matters. My stomach tightened as I connected the dots. Rosalie had access to those files. Nathan stirred beside me and I quickly closed the laptop, sliding the papers into the hidden drawer I'd installed in my nightstand. This was our morning dance. Me transforming from shadow investor to suburban housewife in the seconds it took him to open his eyes. You're up early, he mumbled, reaching for me. Nervous about the wedding? Something like that, I said, letting him pull me close while my mind raced through implications. If Rosalie had breached data protocols, if she'd sold information as I suspected, today would be more than just another family humiliation. It would be a reckoning. By 10 a.m. I was in my home office, what Nathan thought was my craft room, surrounded by monitors displaying real-time market data and investment portfolios. The wedding wasn't until 4, but I needed to understand what Vincent had discovered. I pulled up Nexus Capital's internal reports, accessible only to board members and major stakeholders. There it was, unusual access patterns to confidential files, all traced to Rosalie's login credentials. My phone rang. David Marsh, my former consulting partner. Gabriella, we need to talk. His voice carried the urgency I remembered from our days of crisis management. Apex Ventures has been shopping around Nexus portfolio data. Someone inside is selling your company's secrets. Your company. Even David, one of the few who knew about my investments, understood the weight of what was happening. I'm aware, I said carefully. Are you also aware that your sister just bought a $70,000 Mercedes? Cash payment according to my sources. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Rosalie's recent shopping sprees, her designer wardrobe upgrade, the diamond earrings she'd worn to our parents' house last Sunday, all funded by selling the company secrets of the very firm I'd saved. David, I need you to document everything. Times, dates, amounts. Send it encrypted. Already done. Gabriella, be careful. If this goes public. It will, I said. Today. After ending the call, I sat in my office, staring at the wall where I'd hung the original Nexus term sheet, hidden behind a painting Nathan had bought me for our anniversary. 4 years ago, I'd written a check for $20 million to save a company 3 weeks from bankruptcy. I'd structured it through Winters Holdings, insisted on total anonymity, and spent 2 years rebuilding their portfolio strategy from the shadows. Every success Rosalie bragged about at family dinners, every bonus she'd earned, every promotion she'd received, all of it built on the foundation I'd laid while she called me unemployed. The cruelty of it might have been bearable if it were just personal. But she'd weaponized my supposed failure, using it as cover for her crimes. Who would suspect data theft when the sales were supposedly random, when the person being blamed was her unemployed sister who couldn't even understand basic finance? My laptop chimed with another message from Vincent. Board consensus achieved. Full disclosure authorized. Your 40% stake will be revealed if NO proceeds with public humiliation. Your call. I stared at those words, understanding the choice he was offering. I could stop this, protect my anonymity, let Rosalie's cruelty slide once again. Or I could let the truth detonate at her wedding, in front of everyone who mattered to her career. Nathan knocked on the door. We should start getting ready soon. I'll be right there, I called back, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I typed my response to Vincent. Proceed as discussed. Let her introduce me exactly as she plans. Then reveal everything. 3 hours later, I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, adjusting the simple navy dress I'd chosen carefully. Expensive enough to show respect for the occasion, modest enough to reinforce Rosalie's narrative about her unsuccessful sister. Nathan straightened his tie behind me, his reflection meeting my eyes. You look beautiful, he said. Though you also look like you're preparing for battle. If only he knew how right he was. In 2 hours I would walk into that ballroom and let my sister publicly humiliate me one last time. And then, in front of 200 witnesses, the carefully constructed life I'd built in silence would explode into devastating light. The car ride home from the pavilion felt endless, with Nathan's concerned glances and my own thoughts churning like storm clouds. 3 weeks. That's all the time that separated me from that moment of public humiliation, though sitting beside Nathan now, neither of us knew what was coming. The wedding invitation sat on our kitchen counter when we got home, elegant cream cardstock with gold embossing that must have cost Rosalie a fortune. The pleasure of your company is requested, it read, though pleasure was the last thing anyone would feel that day. 3 weeks before the wedding, I drove to Rosalie's Lincoln Park apartment to help with seating arrangements. She'd called me specifically, which should have been my first warning. Rosalie never asked for my help with anything important. The doorman recognized me and waved me through with the tired smile of someone who'd seen too many family dramas play out in luxury buildings. Her apartment was chaos. Wedding magazines covered every surface, fabric samples draped over furniture, and her dining table had transformed into a war room of spreadsheets and guest lists. But what caught my attention were the Nexus Capital folders scattered across her desk, pages visible from the doorway. I recognized the distinctive blue headers of internal documents, and there, clearly visible, was the Apex Ventures logo on what looked like an email printout. Don't touch anything on the desk, Rosalie said without looking up from her seating chart. That's actual important work, not that you'd understand quarterly projections and acquisition strategies. I bit back my response and settled into the chair across from her. The irony of her comment burned, considering I'd written the original framework for those very acquisition strategies she was apparently sharing with competitors. So, family tables, she said, pushing a diagram toward me. I'm putting you and Nathan at table 12 with the cousins from Milwaukee. Far enough from the main corporate tables that no one will accidentally strike up career conversations with you. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Table 12 is by the service entrance. Exactly. Easy exit if you need to leave early, and you won't have to walk past the important guests. She made a note on her chart, then looked up with false concern. I know social situations with successful people can be uncomfortable when you're between opportunities. I'm not between anything, Rosalie. Right, sorry. When you've permanently opted out of achievement. She turned back to her chart. I've already briefed the Nexus executives about family dynamics. Told them you're taking an extended break from professional life. They were very understanding. Vincent especially said he admires women who aren't afraid to depend on their husbands. Vincent Blackwood had said no such thing, I was certain. But I kept my expression neutral as I watched her accidentally knock one of the Nexus folders, revealing more pages. Financial projections, clearly marked confidential, with handwritten notes in the margins that included dollar amounts and dates. Evidence of her betrayal sitting right there in plain sight, camouflaged by her assumption of my ignorance. 2 days later, Mother ambushed me at the dress fitting. I should have seen it coming when she insisted on joining me at the boutique, claiming she wanted to help me choose something appropriate. The shop was one of those aggressively elegant places where the saleswomen spoke in hushed tones and the price tags were hidden, as if money were too vulgar to mention directly. "That's too plain," Mother said, dismissing the third dress I'd tried. "You need something that suggests success, even if it's borrowed success from Nathan." "Mother. Don't mother to me, Gabriella. Do you know how hard this is for Rosalie? Having to explain to her colleagues why her sister with a Harvard MBA is unemployed? The least you could do is pretend to have some kind of position, even if it's volunteer work or consulting." Eleanor pulled me aside, away from the mirrors and the hovering saleswoman. Her voice dropped to the sharp whisper she'd perfected during years of country club politics. "You're jealous of her success and it's showing. This victim act, this refusal to even try anymore. It's embarrassing for all of us." "I'm not jealous of Rosalie." "Then why won't you make an effort? She's worked so hard to build her reputation at Nexus, and you're going to stand there like a monument to wasted potential." Her face flushed with frustration. "Your father and I didn't sacrifice everything to send you to Harvard just so you could become a decorative wife." The word, sacrifice, nearly broke my composure. They hadn't sacrificed anything for my education. I'd paid my own way through scholarships and working 3 jobs. And their current financial stability, the fact that they still lived in their Naperville house, came from the anonymous payment I'd made on their mortgage last year when father's medical bills had pushed them toward foreclosure. But Eleanor didn't know that. She'd never questioned the bank error in their favor that had mysteriously resolved their debt. "Choose whatever dress makes you comfortable," I said quietly. "I'll wear it." That evening, an encrypted email arrived from Vincent Blackwood. My secure phone buzzed with the notification while Nathan and I were eating dinner, and I excused myself to my office to read it properly. "Certain truths will surface at the reception. Be prepared for full disclosure. Board unanimous in support of necessary actions. VB." I tried calling him immediately, but his assistant, a woman named Patricia who'd been with him since the beginning, answered with unusual tension in her voice. "Mr. Blackwood is in emergency board meetings all day regarding a security breach. He said if you called to tell you that everything is documented and the timeline is set." "Patricia, what security breach?" "I can't discuss details, but it involves unauthorized distribution of portfolio information. Mr. Blackwood wanted me to assure you that your interests are being protected." "My interests? My 40% stake?" My sister's betrayal was no longer just suspected, it was confirmed at the highest levels. The rehearsal dinner at Harbor Club the next night was Rosalie's masterpiece of orchestrated humiliation. She'd specifically requested I sit where her work friends could see me while she held court at the head table. The private dining room overlooked Lake Michigan, and the sunset painted everything golden, including my sister's perfectly styled hair as she regaled her bridesmaids with family stories. "The funny thing about Gabriella," she said loud enough for adjacent tables to hear, "is that she actually thinks gardening is a career. Like growing tomatoes is equivalent to growing a portfolio." The bridesmaids laughed nervously, glancing at me. I told Vincent about it and he said it sounds therapeutic. That's corporate speak for, at least she's not doing nothing. Nathan's hand found mine under the table, his thumb stroking my knuckles in silent support. He'd perfected the art of being present without interfering, knowing that my family dynamics were a minefield he couldn't safely navigate for me. "Remember when she tried to apply to McDonald's?" Rosalie continued, wine making her voice carry further. "Even they said she was overqualified. Imagine failing downward so hard that fast food won't hire you." I'd never applied to McDonald's. The entire story was fiction, created to paint me as desperate and failing. But her audience didn't know that, and I could feel their mixture of pity and secondhand embarrassment radiating across the room. That's when I noticed Vincent Blackwood. He sat at a corner table with two other Nexus board members, his expression unreadable as he watched Rosalie perform. Our eyes met briefly and he raised his water glass in the smallest of gestures. Our acknowledgement, a promise, or perhaps a warning. Tomorrow those certain truths he'd mentioned would surface. The night after the rehearsal dinner passed in restless fragments. Nathan's steady breathing beside me marked the hours while I stared at the hotel ceiling, replaying Vincent's unreadable expression and the weight of what would unfold in mere hours. At 5:30 a.m., a soft knock interrupted the darkness. I opened the door to find Rosalie standing in the hallway, still in silk pajamas with a hotel robe thrown over them, her face bare of makeup and vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. She clutched a coffee cup like a peace offering. "Can I come in?" Her voice was smaller than last night's performance, almost uncertain. Nathan stirred but didn't wake as I stepped into the hallway, closing the door quietly behind me. The hotel corridor stretched empty in both directions, its burgundy carpet muffling our footsteps as she led me to an alcove with two chairs near the window. "About last night," she began, fidgeting with her coffee cup. I was nervous. The wine, the pressure of everyone watching. I said things I didn't mean. I waited, knowing there was more coming. There always was with Rosalie. "You know, I don't actually think you're pathetic, right?" She looked at me with eyes that seemed genuinely worried. "It's just that everyone expects me to be entertaining, to have stories, and talking about family is safe territory." "Safe," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "You know what I mean. It's not like you care what those people think anyway. You've never cared about professional opinions or networking. That's why you left consulting." She reached over and touched my hand briefly. "I actually envy that about you. The freedom to just not participate." The apology was classic Rosalie, wrapped in justifications and somehow still making my life choices sound like defeat rather than decision. But I nodded, letting her believe I accepted it. "I need to borrow your pearl necklace," she said, shifting topics with practiced ease. "The one grandmother left you." My something borrowed. The pearls were in my room's safe, a string of perfect Mikimoto pearls our grandmother had worn to her own wedding. They were the only valuable thing she'd owned, and she'd specifically left them to me, the granddaughter who shared her middle name. "Of course," I said, though something cold settled in my chest. Rosalie smiled, relief flooding her features. "At least you can contribute something beautiful to the day even if you can't contribute success. These pearls will photograph better than anything I could buy." There it was, the knife wrapped in silk, the insult disguised as gratitude. Even her apologies were performances, scripted to maintain her superiority while appearing magnanimous. I retrieved the pearls and watched her fasten them around her neck, their luster catching the early morning light streaming through the window. "Perfect," she said, admiring her reflection in her phone screen. "Now I should go start getting ready. The makeup team arrives at 7. By 3 p.m., the Riverside Pavilion had transformed into what looked like a corporate fairy tale. White roses and gold accents everywhere, string quartet warming up, and enough champagne chilling to float a small yacht. I took my assigned seat at table 12, grateful that Nathan had gone to park the car and would miss the initial seating humiliation. The ceremony space filled quickly. I recognized faces from Nexus Capital's annual reports. Board members, senior partners, the kind of people whose decisions affected thousands of jobs and millions in capital. Vincent Blackwood sat in the third row, flanked by two women I recognized as Elena Park and Priya Menon, both board members with reputations for taking no prisoners in business dealings. The music shifted and everyone stood as Rosalie appeared at the pavilion's entrance. She looked radiant in her designer gown, the grandmother's pearls gleaming at her throat. As she passed Vincent's row, I saw Patricia, his assistant, discreetly hand him a manila folder. His expression tightened as he glanced at its contents, then his eyes found mine across the room. A slight nod, confirmation that whatever evidence he'd been gathering was now complete. The ceremony itself was a study in contrasts. Rosalie spoke vows about honesty and transparency while wearing pearls obtained through morning manipulation. She promised partnership and support to James while having spent years undermining her own sister. When she said the words "for better or worse," I wondered if she understood that worse was about to arrive at her own reception. The cocktail hour began with the usual shuffle of congratulations and small talk, but Rosalie quickly transformed it into something else entirely. A one-woman show about success and its opposite, with me as her favorite prop. She guided a group of executives past my table, gesturing in my direction while speaking just loudly enough for me to hear. That's my sister Gabriella. She's the cautionary tale I tell all the junior associates. Harvard MBA top of her class and now look, completely dependent on her husband. This is what happens when women leave the workforce. They become invisible. The executives laughed uncomfortably, some glancing at me with a mixture of pity and secondhand embarrassment. One younger woman started to object, but Rosalie steamrolled over her. No, it's important to talk about. She's exactly why I work 80-hour weeks. The fear of becoming another wife who lost her edge, who let her brain atrophy while arranging flowers and planning dinner parties. What Rosalie didn't know was that 3 of the women in her audience, Miranda Chin, Aisha Patel and Jennifer Martinez, all ran companies that existed because of my silent investments. Miranda's biotech startup had been days from closure when I'd stepped in with $2 million in bridge funding. Aisha's sustainable fashion platform had scaled nationally using my strategic framework. Jennifer's edtech company had just closed a Series B round that I'd orchestrated from behind the scenes. They exchanged glances, clearly recognizing my name and trying to reconcile Rosalie's narrative with what they knew. Miranda started to speak, but I caught her eye and shook my head slightly. Not yet. Rosalie moved on to another group, this time a cluster of male executives from various firms. The saddest part about my sister, she said, now holding a fresh glass of champagne, is that she used to have such potential. But she couldn't handle the pressure, couldn't keep up with the pace. Some people just aren't built for real success. Nathan had returned and was sitting beside me, his hand on my knee under the table. How are you staying so calm? He whispered. Because in about 5 minutes, I said quietly, none of this will matter. That's when I saw Vincent Blackwood walking toward our table with the deliberate pace of someone approaching a business transaction. The folder was still in his hand, and his expression had shifted from professional courtesy to something I recognized from boardrooms, the look of someone about to restructure everything. Rosalie saw him coming and immediately brightened, grabbing his arm as he passed. Vincent. Perfect timing. I was just telling everyone about family dynamics. You have to meet my sister Gabriella, the unemployed wife who can't keep up. The words rang out across the reception space. Several conversations stopped. The string quartet seemed to pause between notes. Vincent looked at Rosalie's hand on his arm, then at her face and finally at me. Vincent's eyes held mine for a long moment before he slowly removed Rosalie's hand from his arm. The gesture was gentle but final, like closing a door that would never open again. Around us, wedding guests sensed something monumental about to happen, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they turned to watch. Gabriella Winters, Vincent said, using my maiden name with deliberate emphasis. His voice carried across the suddenly quiet reception space. The Gabriella Winters from Winters Holdings. The champagne glass in Rosalie's hand began to tremble. What are you talking about? She doesn't have holdings. She doesn't even have a checking account in her own name. Vincent turned to face the growing crowd of onlookers, his voice taking on the commanding tone I remembered from board meetings I'd attended virtually, hidden behind shell company names. I think it's time everyone here learned exactly who Gabriella is. 4 years ago, Nexus Capital was 3 weeks from bankruptcy. Every traditional investor had walked away. We were preparing to liquidate. The trembling in Rosalie's hand intensified until the crystal flute slipped through her fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Champagne splashed across the hem of her designer gown, but she didn't move, frozen like a statue as Vincent continued. Gabriella Winters wrote a check for $20 million. She didn't want recognition, didn't want a board seat, didn't want press releases. She wanted to fix things quietly, strategically, and then return to her life. She owns 40% of Nexus Capital. She is our largest shareholder. Mother Eleanor had been approaching our group, likely to intervene in what she assumed was another family embarrassment. Her face went through a series of expressions so rapidly it was almost comical. Confusion, disbelief, anger, then back to confusion. Behind her, Father Thomas had stopped walking entirely, and for the first time in years, I saw something like understanding dawn in his eyes. That's impossible, Rosalie's voice cracked. She doesn't understand finance. She can't even balance a checkbook. Tell them, Gabriella. Tell them this is some kind of mistake. Vincent pulled out his phone, his fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. Would you like to see the incorporation documents for Winters Holdings? The wire transfer records? Perhaps the strategic restructuring plans she wrote that transformed us from a failing fund into Chicago's premier venture capital firm? He turned the screen toward Rosalie, and I watched the color drain from her face as she saw her reality crumble in real time. Each swipe of Vincent's finger revealed another document, another proof, another nail in the coffin of her carefully constructed superiority. The Morrison acquisition you took credit for last month? Vincent continued, his voice gaining an edge. Gabriella identified that target. The portfolio optimization that earned you a bonus? Her algorithm. The strategic pivot that saved 12 of our startups? Her plan, submitted through encrypted channels you never knew existed. Elena Park had moved closer, her board member instincts clearly activated. Vincent, are you saying that Rosalie has been taking credit for her sister's work? No, Vincent said, and for a moment Rosalie's face showed relief. Then he continued. I'm saying she's been taking credit for her sister's work while simultaneously selling our confidential data to competitors. The reception space erupted. Guests pulled out phones, some clearly recording, others rapidly texting. I heard someone mention Bloomberg, another TechCrunch. The photographer who'd been hired to capture wedding bliss had shifted into photojournalist mode, his camera clicking rapidly as he documented what was becoming a corporate scandal. Vincent produced the manila folder Patricia had given him during the ceremony. These are emails from Rosalie's account to Apex Ventures, Summit Partners, and 3 other competing firms. She's been selling our portfolio data, our strategic plans, our acquisition targets. The total damage is estimated at $30 million. He pulled out a printed email and read aloud. Quote, attached are the Q3 projections. Don't worry about security. My unemployed sister handles filing sometimes, and she wouldn't understand these documents even if she saw them. If anything gets traced, she makes the perfect fall person. My stomach turned. She hadn't just been cruel. She'd been setting me up, using my supposed ignorance as a shield for her crimes. All those times she'd left documents visible during our meetings, she'd been testing whether I'd notice, whether I'd understand. I want a lawyer, Rosalie said, her voice barely a whisper. You'll need one, Priya Menon said, stepping forward. Securities fraud, corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty. The list is extensive. James, who had been standing frozen throughout this revelation, finally found his voice. Rosalie, what is happening? What did you do? She turned to him, mascara streaming down her cheeks, the grandmother's pearls at her throat catching the light like an accusation. I was trying to secure our future. The market is volatile. I needed insurance. Insurance. James stepped back from her. You committed federal crimes for insurance? Vincent cleared his throat, drawing attention back to himself. Rosalie Winters, effective immediately, your employment with Nexus Capital is terminated. Security will escort you to clear your desk on Monday. Any attempt to access company systems or contact clients will be considered a violation of your non-compete agreement. You can't fire me at my own wedding. Rosalie's voice rose to near hysteria. This is insane. Gabriella, tell them to stop. You're my sister. All eyes turned to me. 200 wedding guests, including journalists, board members, entrepreneurs I'd secretly funded, and family members who'd dismissed me for years, all waiting to see what I would do. Mother Eleanor pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with indignation. This is absolutely unacceptable. Whatever corporate drama you people have, this is a family event. You cannot destroy my daughter's wedding over business disputes. Your daughter destroyed her own wedding, Elena Park said coolly. She destroyed it the moment she decided to commit felonies while using her sister's reputation as cover. The photographer's camera clicked again as Father Thomas finally spoke, his voice carrying a weight I hadn't heard in years. Eleanor, stop. Look at what's in front of you. Gabriella owns the company. She's been supporting us all along. The revelation hung in the air as Mother processed this, her worldview visibly reconstructing itself. Around us, the reception had transformed into something between a crime scene and a press conference. Someone had started live streaming. The string quartet had long since stopped playing. Nathan stood beside me, his presence steady and grounding. I felt the weight of 3 years of silence lifting, replaced by something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not revenge, but a deep sadness for the sister who'd valued success so much she'd lost everything trying to steal it. The sadness I felt for Rosalie crystallized into something more concrete as I reached into my clutch and pulled out the envelope I had prepared 3 weeks ago, long before this moment, long before her cruelty at the rehearsal dinner, when I still believed my sister might simply be ambitious rather than corrupt. The cream-colored envelope bore her married name in my careful handwriting, Mr. and Mrs. James Robertson. The crowd of wedding guests seemed to lean in collectively as I stepped toward Rosalie, who had sunk into a chair someone had pushed behind her. Her wedding dress spread around her in ivory waves, and the grandmother's pearls at her throat caught the light as she looked up at me with eyes that held fear, confusion, and something that might have been the first stirrings of genuine remorse. "This was always meant to be your wedding gift," I said, extending the envelope toward her. My voice carried in the hushed reception space. "I wrote this check 3 weeks ago." She stared at the envelope as if it might burn her fingers, making no move to take it. James reached for it instead, his hands steady despite everything that had just unfolded. He opened it carefully and I watched his eyes widen as he saw the amount. $50,000, he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The revelation rippled through the crowd in whispers and gasps, but this silence felt different from the shocked quiet of earlier. This was softer, tinged with something like wonder. Rosalie's tears, which had been flowing steadily since Vincent's revelations, intensified. Her perfectly applied makeup ran in dark rivers down her cheeks as she processed what this meant. I had planned to give her this money before she had publicly humiliated me, before she had called me a failure, before any of this had happened. Generosity had preceded cruelty, and that truth seemed to break something inside her. "Why?" she whispered, finally taking the check from James with trembling hands. "After everything I've done, everything I've said, why would you give me this?" Before I could answer, Mother Eleanor pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with a rage that had been building since Vincent's announcement. She grabbed my arm with more force than necessary, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "How dare you?" she hissed, though her voice carried to everyone nearby. "You planned this whole thing, didn't you? You deliberately waited until her wedding day to destroy her. You've been hiding your success just to humiliate her at the worst possible moment." I gently removed her hand from my arm and reached into my clutch again, pulling out my phone. "Mother, I need to show you something. I don't want to see anything from you. You've ruined your sister's life out of jealousy and spite. Eleanor, please look." My voice remained calm as I opened my banking app and scrolled to the transaction history I had screenshot earlier, knowing this moment might come. January 2021, mortgage payment to First National Bank, account ending in 4782. That's your mortgage. March 2021, payment to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, account belonging to Thomas Harwood. That's Dad's cardiac surgery. Mother's face went pale as I continued scrolling. Every month for the past 2 years, grocery deliveries to your address paid from an anonymous account. The new roof you thought was covered by insurance? The car repairs Dad couldn't explain? The country club membership you thought was a billing error in your favor. She staggered backward and Father caught her arm to steady her. His expression had shifted from confusion to something approaching shame. "It was you," he said quietly. "All of it was you. You've been supporting us while we sat at dinner tables mocking your choices," Mother said, her voice breaking. "While I told everyone you were wasting your life, you were paying for that life." The crowd around us had grown to include nearly every wedding guest. Phones were recording, photographers were shooting, but the atmosphere had shifted from scandal to something more complex. This was no longer just about corporate espionage or family betrayal. It had become something deeper. A reckoning with assumptions and prejudices that went far beyond one wedding reception. Vincent cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the business at hand. Given these circumstances, the board would typically pursue full prosecution for corporate espionage. Rosalie flinched and James's arm tightened around her shoulders. "However," Vincent continued, glancing at his fellow board members who nodded in agreement, "if Gabriella is willing to propose an alternative, we would consider it." All eyes turned to me again. The power in the room had shifted entirely. 3 hours ago I had been the family failure sitting at table 12. Now I held my sister's future in my hands. 6 months of volunteer work, I said, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. Specifically with organizations that help unemployed women re-enter the workforce. Professional coaching on unconscious bias, respect, and ethical leadership. Full restitution for any damages caused by the data breach. Paid overtime if necessary. Rosalie nodded frantically. Yes, anything. I'll do anything. There's one more condition, I added, and something in my tone made her stop nodding. No social media documentation. No LinkedIn posts about your journey of growth. No Instagram stories about giving back. No using this experience as a redemption narrative for professional gain. You do the work because it needs to be done, not because it might restore your reputation. Elena Park spoke up from her position near Vincent. That seems more than fair. Transformative justice rather than purely punitive measures. I'll do it, Rosalie said, her voice stronger now. Not just because I have to, but because I need to. I need to understand how I became someone who could do what I did. The room seemed to exhale collectively. The crisis had not been resolved. There would still be legal consequences, professional ramifications, and personal reckonings to come. But the path forward had been illuminated, and it led toward redemption rather than destruction. As Nathan and I prepared to leave, the crowd of guests parted before us. Some looked at me with newfound respect, others with curiosity, and a few with something approaching fear. The woman they had dismissed as a failure had turned out to be the power behind the throne, and that revelation had shaken their understanding of success and visibility. Nathan's hand found mine as we walked toward the exit, his fingers interlacing with mine in that familiar way that had anchored me through countless family dinners and dismissive comments. Once we were outside in the parking lot, away from the cameras and crowds, he finally spoke. I've known about Winters Holdings for 2 years, he said quietly, leading me to our car. I found some documents you forgot to lock away, did some research, connected the dots. I stopped walking, turning to face him. You knew? All this time. I knew you'd tell me when you were ready. Or you wouldn't. Either way, I married Gabriella, not Winters Holdings. I fell in love with the woman who grows tomatoes and reads philosophy and makes me laugh, not the silent partner with the investment portfolio. As we drove away from the Riverside Pavilion, I watched the venue shrink in the rearview mirror, taking with it 3 years of carefully maintained silence and a lifetime of family dynamics that would never be the same again. The drive home from the Riverside Pavilion stretched through Chicago's evening traffic, giving me time to process what had just happened. Nathan kept the radio off, understanding that I needed silence more than distraction. The city lights blurred past our windows as we headed north toward our townhouse, each mile taking us further from the explosion that had been Rosalie's wedding reception and closer to whatever came next. 3 months passed before I heard anything substantial about Rosalie's progress. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, the Chicago Women's Employment Initiative's logo prominent on the envelope. I almost didn't open it, assuming it was a donation request, but something about the handwritten address made me curious. The director, Patricia Williams, had written personally rather than sending a form letter. Her handwriting was careful and deliberate, the kind that suggested someone who understood the weight of words. She described how Rosalie had arrived for her first volunteer shift looking like she expected to be turned away, wearing designer clothes that she quickly learned were inappropriate for the work. By her 3rd week, she was wearing jeans and bringing coffee for the entire staff. Patricia wrote about one incident in particular that had caught her attention. A former marketing executive named Sarah Chin had been out of work for 3 years after her company folded. She'd applied to over 200 positions without success, and her confidence had eroded to nothing. Rosalie had spent 12 consecutive hours with her, revising her resume, practicing interview techniques, and most importantly, helping her understand that employment gaps didn't equal personal failure. According to Patricia, Rosalie had told Sarah something that made the director take notice. Being unemployed doesn't mean being worthless. My sister taught me that the hard way. She was invisible by choice, building empires while everyone thought she was failing. Sometimes the most successful people are the ones you can't see. I set the letter down and walked to my garden, where the late summer tomatoes were reaching their peak. The Cherokee purples were particularly beautiful this year, their dark skin hiding the complex sweetness inside. I thought about invisibility and choice, about the different ways people could disappear and the various reasons they might choose to. 3 more months passed before Rosalie called directly. December had arrived with unusual warmth for Chicago, and I was reviewing year-end portfolio reports when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Gabriella? It's me. Rosalie. Her voice sounded different, stripped of the polished confidence that had always characterized our conversations. Would you be willing to meet? Just coffee, nothing formal. There's a quiet place on Division Street called Roots. I knew Roots. It was small, unimpressive, the kind of place that served honest coffee without pretense. Not the type of establishment the old Rosalie would have even noticed, much less suggested. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a plain ceramic mug. Her hair was pulled back simply, no elaborate styling, and she wore a sweater I recognized from college. Soft gray cashmere that had been a gift from our grandmother. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. We sat in silence for a moment before she began speaking, her words coming slowly as if she was still figuring them out as she said them. The data selling started small. Just little pieces of information that seemed harmless. Market trends that were going to be public anyway. General directions the company was considering. She stared at her coffee as she continued. But then it became about more than money. It was about insurance, about making sure I had value outside of Nexus. Because what if they figured out I wasn't as brilliant as everyone thought? What if they realized that half my insights came from overheard conversations and educated guesses? "You were scared," I said. "Terrified," she corrected. "Every day I went to work expecting to be exposed as a fraud. So I created actual fraud to cover for the fraud I thought I was. The irony isn't lost on me." She finally looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "But the worst part was using you as cover. Assuming you were too stupid to notice, too unsuccessful to matter. I measured worth by visibility, never realizing invisible people might be holding up the whole structure. For the first time in our adult lives, I saw my sister clearly, not the polished exterior or the ambitious facade, but the frightened person underneath who had built armor out of achievement and weapons out of other people's perceived failures. Thanksgiving arrived 2 weeks later, and the family dinner was a study in changed dynamics. Mother Eleanor had abandoned her usual seating arrangement, the one that traditionally placed successful family members near the head of the table and relegated others to the periphery. Instead, she'd mixed everyone together seemingly at random, though I suspected there was nothing random about it. When she asked about my work, she actually listened to the answer. No attempts to make strategic investing sound more impressive than it was. No quick changes of subject to Rosalie's situation. Father surprised everyone by admitting he'd suspected something for years. "The mortgage payment in 2019, he said, carving the turkey with unusual focus. "The bank said it was an error in our favor, but I knew better. Banks don't make $60,000 errors in anyone's favor. I figured it was you, Gabriella, though I couldn't prove it and didn't want to risk being wrong by asking." Mother looked at him with surprise. "You knew and didn't tell me?" "Some gifts are meant to be invisible," he replied, glancing at me with a small smile. "The best kind don't require thank you notes." After dinner, Rosalie pulled me aside to show me something on her phone. It was a spreadsheet meticulously organized, documenting 400 hours of volunteer work, double what the court had required. Each entry included names, dates, and brief notes about the women she'd helped. Maria, who'd been laid off from manufacturing. Jennifer, whose startup had failed. Amanda, who'd left the workforce to care for sick parents. "I'm thinking about starting something," she said quietly. "A consulting firm specifically for women with non-traditional career paths. Not placement services, but strategy consulting for people whose resumes don't fit standard templates. I could help fund it," I offered. "No." The response was immediate and firm. "I need to build something real from scratch without shortcuts or silent partners. You taught me that real success can afford to be quiet. Now I need to learn if I can build something genuine, something that exists because of what I create, not what I take from others." I watched Rosalie walk away from our Thanksgiving conversation with her phone clutched tightly, those 400 documented hours representing something far more valuable than time served. Winter settled over Chicago with unusual ferocity that year, and I found myself thinking about transformation, how ice could preserve or destroy depending on what lay beneath when the thaw came. 1 year after the wedding disaster, my phone rang on a quiet March afternoon. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when Rosalie's name appeared on the screen. This time, her voice carried genuine excitement rather than the manufactured enthusiasm I'd known for years. "We got it," she said without preamble. "Morrison Industries wants us to design their entire women's reentry program. Not because of connections or favors. They found us through our work with the Employment Initiative. They chose us based on merit." Morrison Industries was significant. They employed 12,000 people across the Midwest and had publicly committed to hiring more women returning to the workforce after extended absences. This contract would establish Rosalie's firm as legitimate, not just another vanity project funded by family money. "I used the wedding gift as seed capital," she continued, her words coming faster now. "Every penny went into the business. Legal fees, initial operating costs, website development. But Gabriella, I'm paying it back. With interest. The first check goes out next week." "You don't have to." "I do," she interrupted. "Money without respect is just paper. You taught me that. But respect without money still has value. I need to prove, mostly to myself, that I can build something that generates both." The following week, a check arrived for $5,000 with a handwritten note. "First of many. Building something real takes time, but some debts can't wait." It was the beginning of a monthly ritual that would continue for the next year, each payment accompanied by updates about the women her firm had helped navigate non-traditional career paths. That same month, Vincent Blackwood called with an unusual request. The annual Nexus investor meeting was approaching, and he wanted me to attend in person for the first time since my initial investment. I'd always participated virtually through encrypted connections, maintaining the separation between Gabriella the person and Winters Holdings the entity. The meeting was held in Nexus's new offices, a gleaming space in the Loop that was a far cry from the converted warehouse where Vincent and I had first shaken hands. 40 investors filled the conference room, representing combined assets worth more than some small country's GDP. I sat in the back, still preferring shadows to spotlights, even as Vincent called the meeting to order. Halfway through the standard presentations about returns and projections, Vincent departed from the agenda. "Before we continue, I want to acknowledge someone who's been instrumental to our success but has never sought recognition for it." The room turned as he gestured toward me. "Gabriella Winters saved this company 4 years ago, but that's not the whole story. Her strategic guidance prevented 40 layoffs during our restructuring. Her intervention saved dozens of startups from premature closure when traditional metrics would have written them off. She saw potential where others saw problems, and she did it all without requiring a single press release or public acknowledgement." The applause that followed felt different from the usual corporate courtesy. These were people who understood the value of strategic silence, who knew that the most influential players often worked from positions nobody could see. As I stood to acknowledge their recognition, I realized something important. Visibility itself wasn't evil. It just shouldn't be mandatory for validity. 2 months later, Rosalie called with another request, this one more personal. Her firm was hosting a workshop for women re-entering the workforce after extended absences. Illness, caregiving, choice, or circumstance. She wanted me to speak, but not as the major investor or strategic consultant. She wanted me to speak as someone who had chosen invisibility and found power in it. The workshop was held in a community center on the South Side, a deliberate choice to make it accessible to women who couldn't afford downtown parking or transit. 23 women sat in folding chairs, their ages ranging from late 20s to early 60s, their stories written in the careful way they held themselves, protective but hopeful. Rosalie stood at the front of the room to introduce me. She wore simple clothes, professional but approachable, and when she spoke, her voice carried none of the performative brightness that had once defined her. "I want you to meet my sister Gabriella, who taught me that success has many faces, most of them quiet." As she continued the introduction, I felt the last of my anger dissolve into something warmer. Her cruelty hadn't come from malice but from fear. Fear of invisibility, fear of irrelevance, fear of becoming exactly what she thought I was. She'd conquered that fear not by becoming visible but by understanding that visibility and value were separate currencies. My talk focused on strategic invisibility as a choice rather than a sentence. I told them about leaving Deloitte not because I'd failed but because I'd succeeded enough to know that traditional success wasn't my goal. I explained how invisible influence often carried more power than public authority, how silent money could move mountains that loud money couldn't budge. Afterward, a woman named Diane approached me. She'd been a CFO before leaving to care for her mother with dementia. 5 years later, she couldn't get interviews because her resume had a gap that no cover letter could adequately explain. "You're saying the gap isn't weakness?" she asked. "I'm saying the gap is data," I replied. "It tells them you can prioritize something other than career advancement. Some companies will see that as a liability. The right ones will see it as proof of your values." That evening, our family gathered for dinner at my parents' house. Not for any special occasion, just because we'd started doing that monthly now. Mother Eleanor had begun volunteering with the Employment Initiative, teaching interview skills with the same precision she'd once applied to criticizing career choices. During dessert, she mentioned something remarkable. "I've been working with a woman who reminds me of myself," she said, passing the pie around the table. "Except she's honest about her struggles. Made me realize I never told you girls that I actually wanted to work when you were young. Your father and I decided I should stay home, and I spent 20 years pretending it was my dream instead of my compromise." Father looked at her with surprise. After 40 years of marriage, she was still capable of revelations. "I retired early because of burnout," he admitted, seemingly inspired by her honesty. "Not because we had enough saved, not because I wanted to golf. I just couldn't face another day of pretending to care about quarterly reports. But I was too ashamed to say that, so I let everyone think it was about financial planning." These confessions created something new around our dining table, an understanding that everyone had been performing their own versions of success, hiding their own vulnerabilities behind acceptable narratives. We weren't just a family anymore. We were conspirators in the project of redefining worth. The transformation of our family didn't happen overnight, despite how dramatically it began. As I sat at our dining table that evening, listening to my parents' unexpected confessions about their own hidden struggles, I understood that we were all still learning how to be honest with each other. The performance of success had been our shared language for so long that speaking truth felt like learning a new dialect entirely. 2 years after Rosalie's wedding disaster, she called to invite me to her company's anniversary celebration. "It's nothing fancy," she said, and I could hear her moving around what sounded like her kitchen. "Just some clients and colleagues at my apartment. But I want you there. I need you there." The party was intentionally small. Maybe 15 women gathered in Rosalie's living room on a Thursday evening. The apartment itself reflected her transformation. Comfortable furniture instead of showpieces, bookshelves filled with actual books rather than decorative objects, and photographs of the women she'd helped rather than awards or certificates. She stood near the window as the sun set over Chicago, holding a glass of wine but not drinking it, seemingly gathering her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice carried across the room with quiet authority rather than performed confidence. 2 years ago, I destroyed my own wedding reception through arrogance and cruelty, she began, causing several guests to exchange glances. They knew the story or thought they did. My sister Gabriella was there and I introduced her to my boss as an unemployed failure. What I didn't know was that she owned 40% of the company I worked for. She found my eyes across the room and continued. "But that's not the real story. The real story is that Gabriella taught me the difference between spotlight and illumination. She chose to be the light itself rather than stand in it, and her light helped countless people find their way, including me, even when I was too blind to see it." The room was quiet, but it was a warm quiet, full of understanding rather than discomfort. These women had all navigated their own journeys through traditional and non-traditional success. They understood the weight of Rosalie's words. 6 months later, Rosalie gave birth to a daughter. She called me from the hospital at 3 in the morning, exhausted but exhilarated. "Her name is Grace," she said, and I could hear the baby making those small sounds newborns make, somewhere between crying and singing. Not after anyone. Just Grace. For the concept itself. When I visited them the next day, Rosalie was sitting by the window in her hospital room, holding this tiny person who had no idea yet what the world would expect from her. "I want to raise her differently," Rosalie said without looking away from her daughter's face. "To value kindness over accomplishment, substance over visibility." She paused, then looked up at me with eyes that held something I'd never seen before, complete vulnerability without shame. "I want you to be her godmother. I want her to learn early what took me 30 years to understand. That worth isn't measured in LinkedIn endorsements or salary figures or how many people know your name. Baby Grace wrapped her impossibly small fingers around my thumb when I held her, and I thought about the world she was entering, one where her mother now understood that invisible support could be more powerful than public success, where her grandmother had learned to value truth over perception, where her grandfather could admit to burnout without shame. That winter, Vincent Blackwood made me an offer I hadn't expected. We met in his office on a snowy December morning, the city spread out below us like a monochrome photograph. He pushed a folder across his desk containing a buyout proposal for my stake in Nexus Capital. $60 million, he said simply. Triple your initial investment. You could walk away, truly disappear if that's what you want. No more board meetings, no more strategic consultations, complete freedom. The number was staggering, enough to ensure not just my comfort but generations of it. I studied the documents, understanding what he was really offering. A clean exit from the last visible tie to the corporate world, the final step in becoming truly invisible. I have a counteroffer, I said, closing the folder without signing. I keep my stake, but we use my position to establish something new. A fund specifically for women who are leaving traditional workforce paths by choice. Not charity, not rescue money, but strategic investment in alternative definitions of success. Vincent leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Let me guess. You want to run it anonymously? Actually, no, I said, surprising both of us. This one should be visible. Not because I need recognition, but because other women need to see that choosing a different path isn't failure. It's just different lighting. We announced the fund at the next investor meeting. Rosalie attended as my guest, and when the announcement was made, she stood up immediately. I want to be the first donor, she said, her voice steady despite the room full of powerful people watching. I owe a debt to every woman I dismissed as unemployed when they were just undefined. This is how I begin to pay it. Her contribution was modest by venture capital standards but enormous by personal ones. Every dollar of profit from her firm's first year. The gesture moved beyond apology into action, beyond words into concrete change. Now, on this quiet Sunday morning, I knelt in my garden while Nathan read in his chair on the patio. Rosalie had brought Grace over, and the toddler was carefully examining a tomato plant with the intense concentration only small children can muster. She looked up at me with eyes that were her mother's but held none of the judgment that had once lived there. Pretty, she said, pointing at a Cherokee purple tomato still green on the vine. It will be, I told her. Sometimes the best things take time to show their true colors. Rosalie sat on the garden bench, the same one Nathan and I had bought at that garage sale years ago. She watched her daughter explore, and I saw in her face something I'd never expected to find: peace. Not the peace of victory or vindication, but the deeper peace of understanding. The revenge I'd thought I wanted at her wedding had never been the point. Revelation was what mattered, pulling back the curtain not to destroy but to illuminate. Watching my sister teach her daughter that helping others up was more important than standing above them, I understood that transformation was the ultimate success. True success didn't need spotlights or announcements. Like the strongest light, it didn't need to declare itself because its effects were visible everywhere it touched. In the women Rosalie helped find work, in the companies quietly funded through anonymous investments, in a small child learning that worth had nothing to do with visibility and everything to do with impact. If this story of corporate revenge and family redemption had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Vincent revealed Gabriella's 40% ownership at the wedding reception, watching Rosalie's champagne glass shatter as her world crumbled. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.